It's Thursday, July 11th, 2024. This is Ashton Ellett here with another installment of the Senate Staff Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Washington, D.C. with Lauren Claffey Tomlinson. An Augusta native, she received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Georgia and a master's degree in corporate communications and public relations from Georgetown University. She joined the personal staff of Senator Saxby Chambliss in 2009 and became press secretary in January 2011. In 2012, she became communications director for the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. She worked briefly as communications director for the House Committee on Homeland Security before stepping away from Capitol Hill to begin work in the private sector, including a stint as head of corporate communications for the Southern Company. She returned to government service in 2017, this time working for the executive branch as Deputy Assistant Secretary, Strategic Communications at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Since 2018, she's worked in a variety of strategic communications, strategy, and consultancies, including Claffey Communications, where she is founder and president. Ms. Tomlinson is also a visiting fellow at George Mason University's National Security Institute. Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So many accolades in so short of time.
I know. Well, I would have worked for Saxby the whole time, but
there you go.
Then he retired on
there
me.
You
so.
go. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. But let's start at the beginning. Tell me about growing up in Augusta.
What is there to say about growing up in Augusta? It's home of the Masters.
That's
it was
right.
Lovely.
Were you one of the families that stayed or left during Masters Week?
We left. Cleaned the house.
Rented the house and left.
Removed all the photos, shoved them in a closet, and left. And it was great. We'd always go down to Florida. Spring break always coincided with the Masters, and then we would come home, and whoever had rented our house would always have left little gifts.
Oh,
yeah, so
good and bad, I'm sure.
Well, it was gifts to children. It was travel packs of of toothpaste.
I see what you're saying.
And other things, but it was always really wonderful. Yeah, shower caps.
Right. So tell me, what did your parents do for a living?
So my father still works at Claffey Printing, which is a printing company, and his father started it many, many years ago. And then my mom, when we were growing up, she was a stay-at-home mom, and then she started her own company as a mailer, so a bulk mailing company. Mm-hmm. And then she's had a couple of other jobs since then, since folding the company.
So was your family involved in politics or interested in politics, or was that just something that...
Nope, not really at all, to be honest. So they weren't members that I know of the local Republican Party or anything like that. My father was a member of the community, and he's president of the Somerville Historical Association, and so obviously active members of the community, sure. Especially for my dad having grown up there, and his father having grown up there. But not necessarily political in the way that you would think about the two-party system.
Okay. Now, was that an interest of yours growing up, or
nope,
not at all?
Not at all. I wanted to be a doctor, and then I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I went to the University of Georgia, and I was pre-med for a little bit, and then I was like, I can't pass organic chemistry. This is so hard. And so I switched majors and decided I wanted to go to law school instead.
Okay.
For me, the underlying passion has always been people and English. So I always had a really hard time trying to marry that, my interest.
So you were a Park Hall kid, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was one credit away from getting an English minor at University of Georgia. And so I ended up taking a bunch of psychology classes just out of interest, and ended up with the psychology major. And then I looked up and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with the psychology major? And so I was like, I guess I'll go to law school because, that makes a lot of sense. I can write and, argue, and we'll do that. And that's what led me to politics. Ultimately, I took an internship at the governor's office when I was in college. I was doing executive appointments, and this would have been Governor Perdue, Sonny Perdue.
Okay.
And that was kind of my first foray. So it wasn't a particularly political position. I was just vetting, doing research and vetting people that were up for state positions. But it kind of gave me a taste into government.
Okay. And I saw where you interned at Senator Isaacson's office as well. Was that your first foray into Washington and Capitol Hill?
Yes. It's kind of funny because, I mean, like I was saying, I didn't really have like a huge plan to get into politics. It was all very like serendipitous now looking back. So I was a Kappa Alpha Theta in college. And held leadership positions within the sorority. And one of our advisors was the sister of the chief of staff to Johnny Isaacson. I had no idea that connection was there. So Chris Carr's sister, Sarah Evans.
I was trying to think if it was Heath, Chris, or Jones.
It was Chris. Yeah, Chris was the chief at the time, and his sister Sarah Carr Evans was my advisor, house advisor for the sorority. And I was just kind of like, I was graduating early from college. I didn't know what I was going to do next. And I was applying to a bunch of random stuff, right? Like I applied to like an internship at a PR firm in Atlanta. I applied to Johnny Isaacson's internship program because I was like, well, I should probably, if I want to be a lawyer, I should probably figure out how laws are made. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll go to DC. And anyways, I was throwing spaghetti.
So this was the master plan, right?
Yeah, this was I was very well organized at this stage of my life. And I got a call from Senator Isaacson's office from Chris Carr, and he was like, and during the interview process, he was like, oh, you know my sister. And I was like, do I?
Yes.
I was like, yes, absolutely. And anyways, Georgia being small the way that it is, her recommendation obviously went well. I jived with the staff. I was very excited to take an internship. So once I graduated in December of 2008, January 2009, I moved up to DC and took that position with Senator Isaacson's office as an intern. And so that was how I got started.
And that was front desk phone duty or a little bit of everything?
A little bit of everything.
Okay.
Yeah, front desk phone duty, and then I ended up working with the communications team.
Okay, so
with the press secretary.
That's how
and that's how it started.
Okay. That was Joan communications?
Joan, I can't remember if she was communications director or deputy chief of staff at that point. Yeah. But Marie Hodge was in the state office, and Sheridan was the press secretary at the time. And I think Joan was, because Joan always kind of wore like the dual hat of like communications director. Yeah, so I can't remember if she was like doing operations at that point, but definitely like managing the comms.
So what attracted you to communications, and since this is going to be the theme running through this conversation?
I didn't know it was a career until I got to DC. I didn't know that people did it. I kind of knew about
because you weren't marketing. A Grady grad or
no, it wasn't a Grady
like
grad. When I thought of PR people, I thought of like marketing executives and advertising and that sort of thing. And I never thought that communications professionals necessarily got to be steeped in policy or got to deal with deep issues. And so when I got to DC, I was actually kind of peeved because I was like, why would you put me on the comms team? I want to be on the policy team, right? Like I want to be a lawyer and I want to, all that sort of stuff. And I remember Chris Carr being like, you should do comms. Like, you're going to be really good at comms. And I still don't really know what he meant by that. But what I learned through it was I didn't have to specialize in anything in particular. I got to do everything. And having such a broad, I think this is what I love about it still, having such a broad view of everything that touches a Senate office really makes you well-rounded and is very intellectually stimulating because you kind of have to be a quick study on a lot of different topics at all times,
right?
Which keeps it moving and keeps it going. And it also married the people aspect that I mentioned before that I like so much, which is a lot of persuasion, a lot of psychology, a lot of understanding how people are going to receive your arguments and respond to them, with the kind of strategy of thinking through, okay, if we do X, right, like if we release this statement, if we go to this reporter with it, this is going to be the reaction, right? And you get to like gameplay it. So for me, I didn't realize how much of comms actually married all of the things I was already passionate about. And like I mentioned, I was struggling to put together on my own when I was at UGA because I just didn't know. Both my parents were small business owners, right? And they didn't even know that these types of jobs existed. So for me, it was like very serendipitous that I ended up in those roles and got exposed to that early in my career and was able to kind of grasp it. And then that's why I got my master's in it.
Right. Well, tell me about making the transition from intern in Johnny's office to staffer in Senator Chambliss's office.
So I can't remember exactly when it was. So it was a semester internship. So it was a January to May type internship. I can't remember if I lasted all the way to May or not. Because almost like within like 2 months of me being there, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, screw law school. Like, I don't need to be a lawyer. I want to do this. Like, I want to stay here and I want to do this. And I just started doing what everybody does on Capitol Hill, and you just like start dropping resumes off and meeting with people and having coffees and networking. And so I was doing that. And I ran into Charlie in an elevator. He saw me coming out of Johnny's office, and he was like, oh, are you working for Senator Isaacson? And I was like, yep, and I just decided that I'm gonna stay up here forever. And he was like, my mailroom guy just quit. And I was like, perfect.
Hold on 1 second. Let me get you to. So you went from communications intern to the glamorous career of throwing the mail, such as I guess it would be more email than
it was
actual.
Both. Yeah.
Do people still mail letters?
Yes,
to
people still. Well, they did then.
Wow.
Yes, it was sorting mail, and then responding to them. So either if they wrote to us via the old school mail, paper, we responded via paper mail, and then if they emailed, we emailed a response. So it was kind of a good. It was a really good first job, and they say this about the front desk too, because when you're answering calls, it's like you actually get to see what people care about and what people are writing about, and so it's a very quick crash course and yelling about. It's a very big, quick crash course in all things Georgia politics.
Well, tell me was it a different vibe being a staffer, a full-time staffer, than an intern?
Yeah, absolutely.
How was it different?
So I will say, well, I think there's 3 levels really. There's summer interns who come and go so quick that nobody really kind of,
Sure.
Then there's the semester interns. They're there for 6 months. They at the end they end up becoming more and more of working staff. And then the staff assistants, you're truly part of the office, and so your exposure into the inner workings and the team and more sensitive issues is greater. So I think it's just like a graduation.
So who would you have reported to in those early days?
When I was a staff assistant, I think I reported to Kate.
Oh, Olson.
Olson. I think it was Kate, or it was just Charlie.
Okay.
I can't remember who was like actually in charge of the mailroom, because I wasn't reporting to the LD, legislative director,
right.
Although they were in charge of obviously overseeing all of it. So, but all the staff assistants were managed by, I'm pretty sure Kate at the time. I should really know that, but I don't remember.
It's all right. It's all right. I'm sure Kate would know.
Yeah, Kate would definitely know.
So every Senate office is different, but how would you describe the working atmosphere in Senator Chambliss? Was this a buttoned up, easygoing? What was the atmosphere like?
I would say it was very professional, but it was not buttoned up. It was, one of the first things that happened was Julianne coming in and like giving me a hug and welcoming me to the team, right? Because she was like,
and this is Mrs. Chambliss for everybody who doesn't know.
Yeah, this is Mrs. Chambliss, and I think that really kind of sets the tone because she was everybody's mom and grandma, like while we were there. And then, I mean, as you know, Saxby's a little more reserved and formal, but then once you get him going, he's not either. And the whole office, I think, really, the people that stuck around, I'll put it that way, the people
Sure.
who ended up kind of being part of the team. And I was, you know, on the later end of this. I was his second and final term in the Senate. Everyone had really close relationships with him, with his family, with each other. There was a lot of trust there. I think a certain personality type also did well in that office, so everyone got along really well. So I loved it. It's hands down still my favorite job and like culture that I've been a part of.
Was it primarily because this has been a trend changing of late especially in the Senate of staffers not being from Georgia. There are more non-Georgians. I'm not saying there aren't Georgians in these offices. Was your office primarily
All Georgia?
All Georgia.
Our legislative director while I was there, Hugh Gamble, was from Mississippi. I think we had one other Mississippi person, PJ Waldrop, but everybody else was from Georgia.
Right.
I don't even remember why, like Hugh, because once you do like sort of the LD position, like Saxby obviously needed someone with more like Senate experience that had like, you know, it's more of a national
Right.
policy position. But basically every position that could be a Georgia person was a Georgia person. And they were very big about promoting within
Sure.
as well. So, you know, you start out as, you know, a bunch of staff assistants from Georgia, and then everybody moves their way up, and then you end up with an office full of Georgians.
So speaking of promotions, you don't answer the mail forever. How did you explain to folks that you wanted to be in communications and do press work?
I just told them.
You just told. Look at that. Look at that. You know, it's no secret, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure other people are like this as well, but you know, you got to do the grunt work first, and you learn the office. And I told people that I would be happy to take on extra projects in the communications office if that's what I was interested in. Like a lot of these offices, someone has to leave in order for you to have the position. There's not an unlimited amount of positions, so it's also not. It wasn't necessarily how hard I was working, although that was a key part of it. It was also just making sure that I was there at the right time. So much of it is just being there at the right time.
Right.
So at some point, so I think this is when Governor Deal came in. Or no, it would have been before Governor Deal. So Stephanie, who ended up going on to be Governor Deal's press secretary in the state office, she was the press assistant at the time. Stephanie Mayfield, I think, was her maiden name. She lives in Augusta now. She took a job to be then Rep. Deal's press secretary in the House office. So she went from a press assistant in the Senate office to a press secretary in a Georgia House office, or communications director, one of the two. And when she left, that opened up the position for press assistant, and so I applied and was able to join the press team at that point.
So what does a press assistant do? Because I think a lot of folks think it's cutting the clippings out of the newspaper
That's
back
exactly
in the day.
what it is.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I didn't know they still did that in 2010, 2011.
Now I'm sure there's better software, but in 2009 was when this was still happening, I think, or 10, right?
Yeah.
So you have to remember during this time, Obama had literally just used Twitter for the first time in his presidential campaign. One of the things that I did as press assistant was get Saxby on Twitter, right? Because that was still open debate if he should be on social media at that point. I wrote him like 500 memos, and I would send it like every week, and he would write back no and just like send it back to me. And then I would write him another memo, like these are all the reasons you should be on social media, and then he'd write no on the top and like send it back to me. So I would say like this was like a high digital time in the Senate, but. All that to say, my main job was getting up first thing in the morning before anyone else got to the office and copying and pasting all of the news clippings into a Word document, printing them out, and dropping them off on everybody's desk. And like talk about like moving. I'm not even like a high tech person, but like moving towards a more like tech forward leanings. I was able to like get people to accept these clips via email.
No.
I know, right? With like links, right? Like a table of contents with links.
This is a Dropbox.
Yeah, right. Saxby still wanted them printed on his desk when he got into the office at 8 a.m. So, that was the main job. So that meant that I was like waking up and starting that process at like 5 or 6 a.m. Because it was all Georgia and national media. And a lot of it was manual searches, again, because you don't have huge budgets in the Senate. I don't know how much of the software. Nowadays, I would have software that would take me 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, it would be no big deal.
Like Google News Alerts.
Yeah, exactly. We were like one step removed from like physically clipping, like the newspapers and reading them. So that was the main job. And then the rest of the job was helping draft materials and answering the press line. So I would kind of route the incoming press calls to the press secretary, the comms director, what have you. And then I would do first drafts of congratulatory letters to people on their anniversaries or, those types of things. And then sometimes first drafts of press releases and speeches and those types of things. But that was definitely like later after I'd been doing it for a while.
Okay. So in that perch in the communications office, what could you, and then obviously your later career, tell me about Saxby's relationship with the press, because Saxby is this, serious, I don't want to say gruff, but relatively reserved South Georgia guy. Yeah. Tell me about how he worked the press and the press tried to work him and vis-a-vis you in your office.
Saxby understood the role of the press. He did not seek the press. And that was something I respected about him, to be honest. I've worked with other people, and I still do, whose main goal is just to be famous and be in the media and get the quotes however you can. That was not Saxby's main goal. Saxby's main goal was to pass legislation, to do good work for Georgia. And I mean, it sounds so cliche, but it really was. And, or I guess it doesn't sound real, but it was very true.
Right.
And so I ended up, especially later as press secretary and comms director, and I think, my predecessors in those roles too, we ended up being just as much an advocate for the press. This is why you need to talk to this person, as we were defenders and protectors and promoters of Saxby. So it was very much a liaison position. We very rarely were on the record as a spokesperson. Everything, was via Saxby or a statement via Saxby or those types of things. And that was just kind of how things were done while I was there. Now you see a little bit more of people, people putting their spokespeople out on the record. Right. But we didn't do that. We did everything like via Saxby. And he was more interested in Georgia press than he was national.
Okay.
And the Georgia press, some of them drove him crazy. They're because they just weren't asking questions that he thought were relevant. But you asked him to go out and talk to people about what was going on with the Savannah port, he'd automatically do the interview, right? So anything going on with Warner Robins Air Force Base, he's on the phone, he's talking to the Macon people. He'd do the radio show like once a week, that type of thing. We did a lot of, during this time period too, a lot of radios or TV stations, local TV stations would still take video addresses and updates from us via VHS. So
those are tapes.
So every week we would film a political update, a Senate update of things that he had been working on, things that were happening in the Capitol, and mail them down to Georgia, and then they would play them, kind of as like a Sunday public service announcement. So it was a very different media environment in those days.
So that sort of answered my question about that was good. He wasn't like John McCain, who was always doing the Sunday circuit. I don't know that I ever remember seeing Senator Chambliss on one of the Sunday.
When he was,
I'm sure there was, but he wasn't one that
it wasn't
they
automatic.
would go to the well and bring out.
Yeah, I wasn't
Chambliss.
pitching him every week to do that. I wasn't like calling the producer being like, please have him on this week. These are the things he can talk about. However, when he was vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, there was a lot more of that because of his position. Before he was the vice chair of the Senate Intel, he was ranking member of he was chairman and then later ranking member of the Agriculture Committee. So obviously that's a different media market. Different people that are interested
Georgia
in those
AgNet
issues.
Media.
Yeah, exactly. A lot more trade publications. But from his perch as Armed Services and then the Senate Intelligence, that really ramped up towards the end of his career.
Right.
Because this was also during the time period when we killed Osama bin Laden, and he was working really closely with the Obama administration on a variety of national security issues. Benghazi was during this period. So there was a lot more national media attention at that point.
So how did the job change when you went from clipping the files to being press secretary? And like you said, you weren't always out there giving press briefings under your own name. So a lot of it was emails and phone calls and conversations in the hallway.
Yep. So I would say like the graduation there is like I just slowly took on more and more work. The biggest differentiator between being like a deputy press secretary or press assistant and the press secretary is the on-the-record designation. So once you're press secretary, you have the authority to speak on the record on behalf of the senator. You're sending out the press releases under your email address, little things like that. I mean, you really are the manager of the press relationships. So once I started doing that, I can't remember what year that happened. Again, it was like, Ashley was the press secretary at the time. She left. I think she moved over into the private sector or nonprofit world. And then I got promoted into her spot. And the biggest differentiator there just being like the constant media relations aspect of it. So a lot of background briefings, a lot of off-the-record briefings, a lot of coordinating opportunities for the senator. And for me, I really sought to put more strategy behind what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. So making sure that this was during a time where I think you've seen the power dynamic shift a little bit in the Senate since I've been there. I was kind of at that tipping point when the legislative priorities were the most important thing coming out of the Senate because they were actually doing stuff and passing legislation. And press was more of a means to an end to further that goal. And some offices wanted media more than others, but for the most part, it was state was most important for obvious political reasons. And then the national media was to be managed, right? Like not necessarily pursued. There wasn't always necessarily a benefit to getting a ton of national media attention, especially for a Republican. I think that dynamic has shifted drastically to where now the comms directors are, setting the strategy and are just as important, if not more important, advisor to the senators than the legislative directors because of what they're able to do and accomplish. There's also more media to manage and pursue. It's a very fractured environment versus when I was there. We still had a ton of local media at that point. There hadn't been a consolidation of media markets. There were still weekly newspapers in a lot of the counties in Georgia. I'm kind of rambling, but I have this map.
No. I mean, you're from Augusta, the Morris family and their portfolio. I mean, that's all gone.
It's all gone. It all got bought up by like USA Today and like rebranded as local, but it's not. And so much syndicated content going out now. So now it's more important that you actually have the national media relations because they're going to write the story that gets pushed to your local market, which is wild. I have this like map of Georgia that's in my office still of that it was from the 2008 campaign, and it has all of it has the target counties for where Saxby needed the votes and where we needed to spend like a ton of time. I wasn't on the 2008 campaign, but it was like where they needed to spend time garnering support. And it has every single TV station and local paper via county. And 90% of them don't exist anymore. And it's wild. Anyways, it's like, to me, that's like such a problem in today's media environment.
We're processing Senator Chambliss's papers right now at the Russell Library, so I'm sure I'll keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, because those weekly papers we would write weekly columns for. So that was another like thing that we did in the press shop was we would write the first draft of the weekly columns that would go out to all the weekly papers and run on Sundays, and it was very much like the video updates that we would send to the locals. It was just a cleaner way to talk to people directly, and you could also focus in on the issues that county was dealing with and what you were doing for that county. Versus now, it's social media blasts. It goes to everybody. It's way less targeted, so it's harder to talk about the specifics of what the politician is doing for the area.
Yeah. Well, did you have much collaboration with your counterparts in Senator Isaacson's office, or was this just sort of a your bubble, their bubble kind of thing?
No, they were. I mean, Johnny and Saxby were best friends, and the staffs worked really, really closely together. When I was there, actually, at one point, Lauren Culbertson was the press secretary for Johnny Isaacson.
That's not confusing at all.
And Lauren Claffey was the press secretary for Saxby, and then my sister was the press secretary for Lynn Westmoreland, Lee Claffey. So the Georgia reporters were like getting us mixed up all the time. It was great. But just like a ton of LCs running around. But yeah, so we would get a phone call from a reporter. We'd call each other and talk through it. Did you get this reporter? Like, what are you going to say? We would do joint statements together all the time. For example, if we were getting a lot of media requests about the same topic, a lot of the time we would just do joint media statements for Johnny and Saxby if they had the same position. So pretty much constant coordination. There were things that they differed on and they disagreed on, and then we would go our separate ways. But it was never contentious and weirdly never competitive, which was really nice.
Well, I have to imagine the disagreements would be by varying degrees.
Yeah.
These aren't night and day.
Exactly.
Both conservatives, but they have their own priorities. Well, tell me about going from personal staff to committee staff, because those are two very different worlds.
So when I was with Saxby, the committee, the comms director sat in the personal office, so I was both. It was like basically an umbrella for both. Okay,
interesting.
So I didn't sit.
It's not always the way.
Yeah, it's not always the way. So I didn't sit in the skiff with Martha Scott and Tyler on a day-to-day basis, but
you had the clearances.
Didn't have the clearances.
Oh,
no
of course
need.
They wouldn't give the press.
Yeah, exactly. No need at that
me?
point for me to have a clearance.
Silly me.
Yeah. So, so we would meet outside of the Senate Intelligence Committee room, and obviously talk about anything that was open source or that they were dealing with. Which, from their perspective, they were like, "You only need to know." It was a very much need to know type situation. And I would coordinate with them on anything that I had incoming, or if I saw opportunities for Saxby to weigh in on stories to further his reputation and leadership position as an intelligence expert. So we kind of worked that way. And then anytime they had like major announcements or reports that were coming out, I would work with them on a release strategy and how we were going to do it and do first drafts of materials and things like that.
Okay. Now, as Saxby's person on the committee, did you also work with the chair or ranking office? With
Senator Feinstein's staff.
Okay, so it would have been Feinstein at the time.
Yep, it was Feinstein at the time. And they were great. Obviously a very different political background, but at least from my perspective, what I've found, not only for the Senate during that time period and how senators, especially ones that had been around a long time like Saxby and Diane, viewed the job, but also the way in which people view national security more broadly, which I think is still true in DC, as more of a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue.
And you especially see that in this, less so with the House, but definitely
In the Senate for sure. Again, it's varying degrees, but for the most part, people agree on the broad direction. They were very respectful towards one another. Again, lots of coordination on press strategy, lots of joint statements, those types of things. They worked really closely together on legislation like cybersecurity, liability bills, and like other things that kind of were, again, these bipartisan issues that really helped the intelligence community. They both were fierce defenders of the intelligence community too, from an oversight perspective. The only time they were really disagreeing was when John Brennan, I don't know if you remember this, and there was like the issue of them stuffing papers down their pants and, classified documents. It was like a whole thing.
And we never heard about classified documents ever again.
Yeah, right. I think it was. I think that was related to the interrogation report.
Yeah.
There was some differences of opinion there, but broadly they worked very well together, and they resolved their differences, together in private. They'd call each other, and then they would always present more of a united front. So it made working with with her press secretary and comms director super easy.
Was this all going on when you were in graduate school, or when did you?
I did graduate. I did night school, and I started when I was a press assistant, and it was a 2-year program.
Okay.
So I was wrapping that up when I was a press secretary.
Well, that sounds exhausting. But
yeah, but no kids. I didn't have anything else to do.
Fair enough. It's all about time management.
Yeah, exactly. Just went to work, went to school, then went home, went to bed, went back to work.
Oh yeah, because you had to be in at 5:30 in the morning.
Yep.
How far was your commute back then?
I was living in Georgetown Glover Park, so it was, I don't remember, 30 minutes or 45 minutes.
I was going to say, there's no good metro from there.
Yeah, there's no metro, so I was driving in most days. There was a time period where I was doing the bus and the metro, and then I quickly stopped doing that.
That's where I love mass transit, especially in DC. But I draw the line at 2 different kinds.
Yeah.
I usually just take the metro as far as it'll take me, and then I'll walk the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. That's just me anyway. That's my quirk.
We were lucky that we had parking passes.
Yeah.
Right next to the Russell Building, which got closer as you got more senior.
That's right. That's
Another perk of being in the office for a while. It was, especially since I was going in so early, I was the only one in there when I was in grad school, so I wouldn't even put my makeup on. I would literally just roll out of bed, go do the clips, and then I could get dressed before everybody even got to the office.
There you go. Well, tell me, you would have been press secretary at the time. What were the conversations like surrounding Saxby's decision to retire from the Senate and not seek re-election in 2014?
So that had been a rough year because of his position that I still believe is a good position on the Gang of Six debt and deficit reduction. And this was, 2010 was when the Tea Party came into existence, I guess you could say. I wouldn't say power, but when they became more of a thing in Georgia. And so you were just seeing the beginnings of some of that hard right, populist type political environment. For us, this manifested in the rumors. I don't think that it was accurate, the way they were portraying Saxby's tax stance. But as part of the debt and deficit package that he was negotiating with the Gang of Six, there was entitlement reform, there was spending cuts, and then there was tax reform as part of this. Saxby, up until this point, had been, only advocating for, the fair tax, right? He wanted.
Oh yeah.
So he was definitely not a tax person. But as part of the negotiations, they were discussing a wide range of tax reforms that could not be too burdensome on the American people, but also increase revenue. That part got so latched on for a while, especially with the media. And I think it was like Thanksgiving when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was I remember we were trying to take time off, and of course you just don't take time off with
because it was.
jobs.
I think it was debt ceiling, CR.
Yep.
I think that was the fiscal cliff was what they called it.
The fiscal cliff was coming.
Yeah.
Yep. Which now we've had like 3 of them, and
yeah, it's an every 6-month thing now.
Yeah. And it was really frustrating to watch and to be a part of that, because what he was able to accomplish as far as not only getting together a framework for something that is so difficult like that, third rung of politics, just so hard, then to work around leadership. Like McConnell didn't want to bring it up to the floor, and he was still able to work around leadership to get people to ask leadership to bring it to the floor. And to do all of that and then it not go anywhere because, we want to wait until, after the election, or, maybe we'll be in power then, and, all this stuff, to get just like good policy get railroaded by bad politics, I think was super disheartening for everybody that worked on it. It was very jading for me, like as a staffer. And I think that was just like, that was kind of the end. We had heard rumblings at that point that somebody was maybe going to primary him. I don't even remember who it was. It wasn't going to be serious. Saxby definitely would have won. But I think at that point he had been fighting so hard for so long that he just was like, this is it. So I don't remember. I wasn't a part of any of the discussions with him as far as like, are you going to do this? Are you not going to do this? I don't know who all Saxby really consulted about that. I know Charlie for sure. And I think his campaign manager, and I can't remember the guy's name. I didn't work too closely with him. Can't remember. I could see his face, but I can't remember his name. So he obviously had the people that he was talking to and that sort of thing, but I wasn't looped in until right before we were making the announcement to help get the announcement together, and kind of like time out, like when we were telling staff, when we would tell press, like, that sort of thing. So it was sad. It was a sad day.
Well, what did that mean for you? I think we know what that meant for you professionally, but how did you go about, you knew there was a clock ticking on your time in Senator Chambliss's office. So what do you do going forward, to advance your career?
Everybody started having those conversations and trying to figure out what they were going to do next. For me, I wasn't ready to leave politics at that point, so I stayed with Saxby, and I had some conversations with people, but nothing really stood out. The good thing is about DC and these jobs, at least, is when your member announces retirement, it's actually a blessing for staff, because everyone has tons of heads up, and all the other offices know that staff will be available for hiring. Especially
as opposed to your boss losing on election night.
And then you're with a million other people that are also job searching at that point. So we had a lot of people reaching out to us, how can I help? A lot of other offices, when positions would come up, Saxby was a really well-respected member, and I like to think that we had a really wonderful staff that was good at their jobs. So we had lots of other Senate offices reaching out, grabbing staff at different points. I think the hardest part of that was everybody wanted to stay until the very end, but then you don't want to lose out on an opportunity.
Right.
So that actually became more of the struggle, was the staggering of staff leaving, because everyone felt so fiercely loyal to Saxby. And I think that speaks to kind of Saxby's character.
Well, how do you, obviously you took a job in the House.
Mm-hmm.
what was it like going from the Senate to the House?
I'm very glad I did it because the Senate and the House are so different.
Yeah.
And most people go House to Senate, which I think makes a little bit more sense. Going Senate to House was a little hard. However, I was working on the committee, and we were in the majority, which was different. And
that's right, you were never in a Senate majority.
yeah, I was just in the Senate minority. So it was really nice. That part was fun. But the Senate is it's different. You know, like the members have less people to worry about. You know, they're not balancing the issues of a state. From a media perspective, you know, like when I was doing, so I kind of did a little bit of a dual hat with Chairman McCall as well. So I was the communications director for the Committee on Homeland Security, but I also oversaw his personal office communications and then a little bit of his campaign as well.
And that's Mike McCall of Texas?
Yes, Mike McCall of Texas was the chairman that I went to go work for, and he's currently chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Right.
And so he was from Austin, Texas, or you know that area.
the surrounding area of
yeah.
Austin.
I think it's
for those unfamiliar with Texas.
Yeah,
politics.
I was gonna say it's like his district like kind of touches like one tiny part of it, and it, you know, super different state. Different issue areas from that regard, different political dynamic. The Homeland Security Committee too, you're obviously very focused in on one issue set. So much like kind of what I had been doing with the Intel Committee, except it was hyper-focused on immigration, on TSA, you know, all the things. A lot of lone wolf issues at that point. We were dealing with ISIS radicalization at the time. So we were working on those issues a great deal. And, you know, McCall was a different member as well. Like, I mean, so personality different from Saxby. He was younger. He wanted to be out there more. The House, you have to be more aggressive and more competitive because there's more competition. So it was just a completely different vibe, but it was great. I mean, I loved it. It was just very, very different.
Well, you weren't there long.
Mm-hmm.
What convinced you to try private sector work with Southern Company?
Curiosity, to be honest. I was very aware that my only professional experience had only been in government at that point. Mm-hmm. And I think I was nearing like 7 years or something like that of professional experience. And to me, that was a little bit of a marker of like, okay, am I going to do this for 20 years and never have experienced the private sector? Or am I going to go get a diversity of experience and perspective? And so for me, it was just kind of the timing was right to go explore that. I also missed Georgia.
Okay.
Like, I missed, that was the one thing that struck me when I was working for McCall was I love Texas. That was great, like meeting all the Texans and doing everything. But I would get really fired up about the Port of Savannah, right? Or, you know, like the Army Corps of Engineer not completing the project at Augusta. But I was not as passionate, obviously. It wasn't my hometown, it wasn't my home state about things that were going on in Texas in that regard. And I didn't realize how much of my love for politics derived from my love of my home. So that was also a driving factor was I was like, okay, I think I want to go home and moving to Atlanta would be good and experiencing not only just like a different issue set, energy, but then also getting to be in a corporate environment and have a different experience beyond just government politics because DC is a bubble. You know, it is good to get out of it. It's not the real world up here. These policy discussions are not the real world. So getting to see things in application was kind of my goal.
So in corporate communications, are you the one that came up with the idea to tell me to set my house to 85 during the summer?
No,
was that you?
That was definitely the Department of Energy, which is like so unrealistic. No. At Southern Company, we want that all the way down, so you're using more energy.
Oh, listen to this. Well, it sounds like you put up a good fight against Potomac fever, but we're sitting here in Washington, so you came back.
I came back.
What lured you back?
I don't know exactly, to be honest. I was working, I loved my job at Southern Company. I was working directly with the CEO, Tom Fanning, who was just like, this wonderful person. Chris Womack there still. It was a regulated industry, so it was a nice mix of government policy and consumer relations and, all of those things, corporate communications. I learned a ton there about the impact of investors in the stock market and, all of those things that kind of drive company decisions, which is not something that I would have been exposed to previously. I had a very more idealistic view of corporate America, I think. I think, again, it was just curiosity. I think it's kind of the theme for a lot of my career decisions. I wasn't involved in the 2016 presidential race by any means. And when Donald Trump won, a lot of people from McCall world were going into the administration at the Department of Homeland Security. He had tapped General John Kelly to be the secretary, and they needed people. They needed good people that had backgrounds in national security, Department of Homeland Security, to go in and staff these positions. I remember calling Saxby and being like, should I do this? I don't know, and I remember him telling me not to. He was like, I like Kelly, but don't do it.
So you wouldn't have considered yourself necessarily part of Trump world?
No, okay. Definitely more of policy comms. There's just not a lot of people who have experience like this.
Right, you had experience in intelligence, which was foreign and domestic, and homeland security.
Exactly.
So, okay.
Exactly. So I think it was, and I think too, the policy people going in were looking for other policy people that they knew, and that type of thing. And I didn't know General Kelly, but I had a lot of respect for him. And so I was like, all right, well, if it's General Kelly, it's Department of Homeland Security, let's go. Okay. Let's try this. I'll never have another opportunity to work in the executive branch. And so I did it, and I went, and it was a crazy ride.
Well, unpack the crazy. How long were you there?
I was there for 1.5 years.
Okay.
So I went in
so
2017.
You were in with General Kelly and out with General Kelly? Is that the timeline?
So General Kelly, I was there for 3 secretaries. So General Kelly went in
That's right.
At the very beginning.
Yeah.
I went in with him by May of that year. So I was in by February, I think, by the time they processed my security clearance and everything. In May of that year, he went to the White House.
Oh, that's right. He replaced Reince Priebus.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah,
that's
why it was so crazy, because the timing of everything.
Yeah.
I say 1.5 years, it felt like 5, because so many different things were going on. And so he went in. May is also the start of hurricane season, which is a very big season for the Department of Homeland Security. So around that time, his General Kelly's deputy, Elaine Duke, who was a career DHSer, she didn't have as much political experience, but she was a really solid leader, respected by the workforce. The White House did not like her at all because she didn't have any political experience. But I worked with her very closely during that hurricane season. This was when we had Hurricane Harvey and Maria. This was Puerto Rico. Harvey was what hit Texas. So it was, it was a bad hurricane season for the country. Lots of recovery efforts. So we did that with Elaine as secretary for that summer. By the end of that summer, the White House had decided that they really didn't like her, and that was when they nominated Kirsten
Nielsen.
Yep. And so I worked with Kirsten on the confirmation process to get her confirmed. Got her confirmed by December, and then worked with her for the next 6 months, and then I was tired.
And then you were sounds like you were tired the whole time.
Yeah.
So did you line something up before you left, or was this one of those things where like, I need to take a break and I'll figure it out later?
So because of the ethics requirements, when
Okay.
you are in federal government, it's really hard to line something up while you're in government.
I see.
And I'm just not, I'm just like one of those people, like I would rather...
I'm not a planner.
I'm not a planner. I also just like, I was like, I'm not going to even come close to this line. Whatever it is
Gotcha.
where I could get in trouble, I don't want to be there. So I just decided to resign, and then I'd had some informal conversations with people.
Sure.
And then I was like, anything further, I want to be out of my government position so I can have more fulsome discussions. And the more I interviewed and talked to people, and my original plan was to go back into corporate communications, the more I realized that I just wasn't really passionate about any of the companies I was talking to. I think this was probably because I was just tired. And so I decided to just consult. And so that's when I started Claffey Communications, and took on a bunch of different clients, and got to kind of dabble in a bunch of different things, and which I found was actually kind of what I loved the most about like all the different jobs that I'd had, was getting to do a bunch of different things.
Right.
And a bunch of different
opposed
issues.
to just doing one company.
Yeah, exactly.
Because your sister she's corporate communications now too. Right?
Yeah, she's corporate comms, policy comms for Shopify.
Okay.
So she was with Lynn Westmoreland. So she interned with Saxby and Johnny like I did. And she got to live with me in DC while she did it. It was so fun. Because I think at that time I was a staff assistant. And then she went
making the big money.
Yeah, the big money. We were in group house. I think I had an air mattress. And then she went to Lynn Westmoreland's office, stayed with Lynn until Lynn retired, I think. And then she went to Senator Joni Ernst's office as press secretary for Joni. So she got to do Iowa World, which was like a whole different thing.
Pigs and corn.
Pigs and corn
Pigs
and
corn.
presidential politics.
There you go. I'm from Illinois, I can say that.
Yeah. Then she went to go work with the corn industry at a trade association. And then moved over to e-commerce with Shopify.
Well, coming out of the pandemic, that was...
Yeah, very...
I'd never heard of Shopify until the pandemic.
Exactly.
I was
I've
at
learned
home.
so much about it.
Right? I think they're a Canadian company,
Yeah.
or at least were originally. How did your experience on the, I think you've alluded to this, how did your experience on the Hill and in the executive branch prepare you for this sort of consulting, strategic communications work, both your solo work and then with other groups?
Yeah, with the various firms.
Yeah.
So I think it's all perspective, really, because I've done the Senate, the House, corporate, state, local, national. At this point, like my curiosity has resulted in like a mixed bag of experiences that's given me a more 360 viewpoint of kind of the influence game and the public policy making game within DC, and then also how the media works and doesn't work in different capacities. All these lived experiences has given me the ability to kind of drop in on corporate issues and be able to see them a little bit more clearly. One of the things that I realized when I was in my corporate seat was you're just trying to survive day to day a lot of the time. So there's a lot of navel gazing that goes on. You're not necessarily aware of everything that's going on around you and all of the external influences. So being able to be that person that can come in and help people see what else is going on to help them move their projects forward is something that I didn't realize all of my different experiences would prepare me for.
Okay. Well, what advice would you give to people, our age, younger, or even older, who are looking for a career change and are thinking about government service? Because, the Senate, the Capitol Hill of 10 years ago is not Capitol Hill of 2024, and who knows what the future holds. But what would your advice be for people who are thinking about maybe working on the Hill or interning or trying to be a staffer like you did to break through?
Even though it's a different environment, I just don't think there's any other experience available to young people to learn everything that you can and get the experience and exposure that you can from just working a few years on the Hill. you are expected to know everything about everyone, right? There is no option to not be prepared, which is a good life lesson. You are staffing principals at a very young age, which builds executive presence and leadership skills that cannot be replicated in a corporate environment or even the executive branch. And I think the Hill in particular is so good at developing those types of presentation and skills because, you look at, even when I was in the executive branch, it takes people so long to get the promotions, to move up the ladder, to get the exposure to more senior people, that they may be 10 years into their career before they're briefing a CEO. They may be 20 years into their career before they're briefing a CEO. You're briefing your CEO at 22, when you're in the Senate, because there's nobody else to do it. So you just have greater exposure to more senior people, which I think is a good skill in and of itself. And being able to act appropriately around those people in professional and social settings is also a skill that you gain. And if you're not able to do that, you don't succeed on the Hill, right? Like you get pushed out pretty quick. So that's always my advice is, it might not be the perfect job. They might not pay you a ton. I hear that a lot from young people now is, they're not going to pay me. There's no benefits, like all these different things. And I'm like, well, you have to think about the other experience that you're gaining. And particularly if you want to do something in your home state, the network that you build in your home state is worth it 10 times over. And you can be doing that from the House or the Senate. When you move into broader national politics, I think having executive branch experience and committing yourself to a public policy area is a really good way to kind of build that same network. But man, you're going to get to know every single person in the state when you're working for a U.S. senator.
Well, what's next for Lauren? What does your future hold?
This
professionally?
Is it. I'm going to keep consulting.
There you go.
So I've kind of found my groove. I'm 20 years in at this point, which is kind of nuts to think about, or almost 20. So this will be it. You'll just keep seeing me doing this.
We'll keep seeing you on CNN.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just keep spouting out random comments to people.
I always said that you're officially old when you go to a congressional office and all the staffers are younger than you. That's how I was like, oh, I'm old now.
Yeah, I always was jealous of.
Of course, Senator Ossoff is younger than I am.
Yeah, so. Right. I was going to say, people. Now we're getting into the stage where our peers are the members.
Yeah, right.
Cochran.
Coburn?
Coburn's office.
Oh, yeah, Oklahoma.
So Coburn's office was always such a standout while we were there because he hired less staff, but he paid them more and they were more senior. Mm-hmm. So it was, and I kind of wonder sometimes, because the trend has been cheaper, younger, more. And I'm wondering if there's not a flip there at some point to more towards that model, because I do think that having more senior people in some of these positions would be really beneficial to the senators, especially now that they've reversed the Chevron rule and more of the policy making will go back to Congress, which I actually think would be great. Theoretically, we'll see what happens. But I think that would be such an interesting change if these staffers, there'll always be the young people answering the phones. Sure. But if there was more senior people that they were able to draw in from private sector or people with other experiences to kind of staff these positions, because I think it'd be really beneficial for the states.
Yeah. Well, and I think your point earlier about having comms, and how central comms is, you can have, unfortunately, sometimes fewer folks working on policy.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's a good thing.
Teams have gotten
I'm not saying that's
bigger.
a good thing.
Yeah.
But
I think about even Senator Perdue's office versus what we had. We had no more than 3 people in the press shop at any given time. Press assistant, press secretary, comms director. They had, because we didn't even have a state person. Johnny always had somebody in the state too, but then he only had 2 people in DC because Joan, wore
right.
so they were still a 3-person team. we, like, how many people were on Purdue's? When he came in, it was like 5 people that he started with, and it grew from there. Like, I mean, it was such a shift in resources towards comms versus, that was like probably like the first indicator, I think, that things had changed.
And that's 2015. So
2015,
that was sort of pre-Trump era.
It was pre-Trump, but we had already felt that stress of like needing the social media presence. But they were they had a whole position dedicated to it, right? Like, I mean, that's, I think, like part of like the evolution of that is like you needed more staff to even keep up with the different like own channels that you were having to maintain because there wasn't media anymore.
Right. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for taking a trip down recent memory lane.
I know. It's been so long.
Right?
I just like think about it for a minute.
Yeah, right? Yeah. When I interview some folks, they're like, well, you have to remember this was 40 years ago. I was like, it all comes back.
Yeah, it all comes back.
And it does. But thank you so much on behalf of our beloved University of Georgia.
I know.
For sitting for the Senate Staff Oral History.
Yeah, of course.
Go
Thanks
Dogs.
for having me.